There's a new context now. It's like we're being given an opportunity to reimagine, to revision, to clarify for ourselves what it is that's most important to us, most precious, most sacred, what really matters to us, and how we want to use our time here. Somehow we can forget these things. Over time, we can lose contact with these healing waters. And that's one of the reasons we do these courses and retreats and all that we do, to cleanse our perception so that we can reattune to that water, to that fountain once again. I think at some deep level, many of us know that things aren't going to go back to the way they were societally, collectively, globally, but also inside our own hearts. And while there's something a bit disorienting about this washing away of what once was, along with that disorientation, there's also a sense of possibility, of potential, something quantum, of approaching our lives in a more inspired and soulful way. And in these times of psychic and collective transition, it's important to slow down, to drop into the earth and the mud and the womb, to hold the broken pieces near and to grieve, to mourn not only the loss of health and life that many have experienced, but also the dissolution of the dream of the way we thought it was all going to turn out. In my experience, this grieving is a prerequisite to turn toward that which has been dissolved, to place it on the altar in front of us, and to really face it directly, which will ask everything of us. And this rebirth part of the death rebirth cycle, if we want to talk about the archetype of renewal, is embodied, in my experience, by way of our willingness and our capacity to feel and to grieve and to allow ourselves to be on the ground, maybe even in pieces, but in an empowered, activated, humility and not knowing. Not a resigned, cold, passive humility and not knowing, but one that is fierce and alive with the transforming fires of wisdom and compassion. And even if we can't accept what is unfolding in our inner and outer lives, which is just the reality at times, we just can't do it. To accept that we can't accept it, that's perhaps the most radical type of acceptance. It's that unconditional. But even if we can't accept it, we can always fall to the ground and bow. And this initiation by way of grief is one of the hallmarks, really, of the path of the wounded healer that I think so many of us are called to and resonate with, even if we don't use that sort of language. And we don't live in a world, that honors the importance of grief and the sacredness of falling to the ground at times, of dissolving the known, not in failure, but in alive humility and raw power. A surrendering, yes, but a surrendering that is empowered and filled with life energy. And the portal to new life, to this archetypal rebirth, renewal, and rejuvenation that is beginning to make itself known now, opens through conscious, embodied lamentation, where somehow we're able to gather the shards of the heart and collect them in a holy vase, a sacred container, placing them on the altar in front of us where we can be in communion with them and the power and the grace and the mercy they hold. And these are the ashes and the tears of new life. And in that intimacy with the materials of grief, we can open to the possibility that this process of falling apart is not some great cosmic error or mistake that we have to correct or repair, but actually is an emissary or an ally of the archetype of wholeness. That the felt sense of wholeness that so many of us long for arises organically out of a previous process of falling apart, which is an essential alchemical teaching, actually. And while it's one that's often dismissed or forgotten about in our contemporary times, it's really up to each of us to bring this sacred reality back into our world. Coming back together or having everything together is not more holy, more sacred, or more spiritual than being dissolved and having fallen apart. From a tantric or a more alchemical point of view, these are equally holy stages, states, and processes. Each an arrow in the quiver of the beloved, each ways that the divine or life or the heart finds us and draws us nearer. And there are moments in all our lives when we find ourselves stressed or overwhelmed or activated in one of our relationships, scared or worried about our future, feeling down and bad about ourselves, or just unsure about what it is that we're really doing here. It doesn't have to rise to the level of what we would call trauma or any sort of psychological diagnosis. For many of us, it's less a clinical matter and more of an existential one, involving our relationship with essential human concerns such as freedom and meaning and purpose and aloneness and even death. Why am I here? What am I doing in this life? Why have I come here? What is a relationship? Where am I going to find meaning? What is my purpose? Am I alone here? How well am I living? And when it's time to leave this place, when I'm called home by the beloved, how will I look back on my life and how I chose to spend my time here? Did I use my time wisely? These are the questions of the second half of life, which I'm guessing that most of us on this call, this is the stage of life we're in, where the questions begin to shift from what I thought I wanted, what my family wanted for me, or my culture, society, the conventional world, shifting rather in the direction of what does the soul want from me, of me. And it's not easy to open to the possibility that these moments of existential rearrangement, we might say, that these are invitations or portals into the soul where there is data and information waiting for us, secret friends and allies and helpers along the way. But this is the alchemical invitation. It isn't a theory for us to believe in, some new belief system or identity to take on. Please don't take my word for it. As always, we have to go into the fire of our immediate experience and see. And this can feel really risky, unknown, uncertain, and it can be so shaky as we turn into the tenderized places and dimensions of our experience, into the shattering, into the dimly lit, the endarkened, shadowy places of the psyche. And the truth is that we live in a culture, in a world, in a time where we've lost touch with the soul and the infinite ways it expresses itself as it calls us closer, nearer to the friend or the beloved within, including through the bluer shades of the spectrum, shifting shapes and appearing at times, even as what in our contemporary medical world we would call a symptom. And this discovery opens us to the whole mandala, or the living reality of the wounded healer, Chiron and his merry band of travelers, and which perhaps we are part of that lineage, the lineage coming down through time by way of the Asclepian dream temples of ancient Greece, where wayfarers and travelers would go to receive vision and to drink from the fountain. But this isn't only a historical matter, as Chiron and those dream incubation and vision temples are actually alive inside us right now, wired into the strands of our DNA and the neural circuitry lighting up this holy human nervous system. And the foundation of all the work that we do whether we're speaking about personal or psychological healing or shadow work or a transformation in our identity and perception, is the capacity to slow down and to bring curious, compassionate awareness to our experience. The required medicine or tincture to melt through billions of moments of habitual consciousness and collective networks of trance. In the Taoist alchemical text I mentioned earlier, The Secret of the Golden Flower, we're invited to turn the light around, which is such an evocative metaphor for our inner work as alchemists of our own lives. I mean, the reality is that most of us weren't trained to practice self-attunement in this way, and our increasingly electronic, digital, and disembodied world doesn't always provide a sensitive holding environment in which to be a true friend to ourselves. But here we are, and in my experience, it's very possible to encode new circuitry, to lay down new grooves in the body and the nervous system, and to become a true friend to ourselves and to life.